Welcome to the Women's Football Show here on PLZ Soccer's YouTube channel. I'm Kerry Pollock, joined here with Alison McConnell, and our special guest this week, I'm pleased to say, is the current CEO of Scottish Women's Football, Aileen Campbell. Aileen, lovely to have you on today.
Yeah, lovely to be here.
And before we get into the nitty-gritty of all the games, let's have a look at the weekend's results. So we've got Celtic's 7-1 win over Hamilton, Rangers were a thrashing 5-1 win over Aberdeen, Hibs got 3 points in a 4-1 win over Montrose, Hearts 3-0 over Dundee United, Motherwell got a last minute winner over Spartans, and Partick Thistle fell to a 3-0 defeat to Glasgow City. Aileen, before we discuss all the games, tell us about your current role then. What challenges do you face in that?
Yeah, so my role is the CEO at Scottish Women's Football, and we effectively run the league and competitions from the third tier of women's football right down to grassroots and the youth games. So those leagues that are just sit beneath SWPL too. So we were really pleased that we were able to kick off our season this year, and what's been useful for us and what's been new for us this season is that not only have we got those two top tiers that we administer, but we've got the regional leagues aligned back in with those performance leagues. So we've got regional leagues growing in numbers with more girls and women playing across those leagues across the country. So that's been a really busy weekend for us this weekend, and interesting to see, of course, the ongoing progress of the SWPL, which has had some really good interesting ties clearly this weekend as well.
I suppose the really positive thing about that too is that you're creating pathways, you're creating genuine pathways for people to go and play, because I think often if you didn't have a route to professional playing careers, then maybe there was a drop off in numbers participating, but obviously there are widespread reasons why you want women to stay in the game and keep playing, even if it's not at a professional level.
Yeah, absolutely, I think as well, and it's a great time to be talking about this following the success of the World Cup and people being able to see phenomenal athletes on their television inspiring more girls and women to want to kick a ball and get involved in the sport. And now we're able to say that, like you've said, that there is a full pathways in many of our clubs across the country, going up all to first team football. And so this weekend we had the Championship and League One kick-off and some great results there, great teams, and we're really pleased as well to see Livingston, who got promotion last year, doing well in SWPL 2, showing that the teams that we're nurturing are doing themselves proud in the SWPL. So yeah, it's great, and great to see so many more opportunities, and that's for by all the recreational stuff that the SFA is doing, all those different initiatives that they have for those younger ages, all together making a really broad and exciting package of footballing opportunities across the country. But again, I don't think anyone wants to be complacent. There's always more we need to do, more that we need to challenge, more barriers we need to overcome. But I think, at this point in time, I think there's a lot to be proud of.
Mm-hmm. Just off the back of that then, we're just coming out the end of the Women's World Cup. Spain have invested hugely in the last decade in their national squad. It would have been great to see Scotland there, but what do we need to do as a country to elevate our sport to the next level?
I think there's probably a lot of things that we need to do. There's not just one silver bullet. I think if we had been, we probably would have used that, and we would be able to kind of progress that. But I think there's a lot to take heart from. We've had some really good results from the national team in some of the friendlies. We've got, competitions to look forward to. The squad has depth, has talent. It feels like things are going in the right direction. But investment's always one of those things that we need to think about, talk about. How do we get more? How do we enable more women to be full-time so that they're honing their craft, that they're feeling that they're supported to become the athletes that they need to be? And there's other infrastructure things that we also need to do. One of the issues that we had identified is that there are not that many female referees, so we used a bit of our sponsorship money from S1 Jobs to try and encourage women who are involved in the game to come forward and think about becoming a referee, and we have had, I think, about 8 or 9 that have come through that. Again, just adding to that pool of referees. Hopefully in time those women will be officiating over women's games and girls' games, so that's another avenue, another opportunity for women to pursue paths in football, and one of those infrastructure pillars that need to go in tandem along with getting more women and girls on the pitches. So I think lots to be optimistic about for the future, but I think this World Cup has really demonstrated that while there is lots of optimism, lots of things to point to and be proud of, lots of countries have real challenges and difficulties, and lots of them in dispute with their governing bodies. So that platform gives further opportunity to raise and talk about issues around pay, around parity as well. So, but I think the SFA have got a particular concentration and priority placed on women in women's football, the women's team more specifically. and want to progress that, and it's all of us together that need to work hard to make it happen.
Referees is a really interesting topic because I can imagine it's probably quite challenging to attract referees in general, but female referees, when you have a generation who can be very open to abuse and social media and things like that, do you find that a challenge, just trying to bring referees into an environment where you can be open to quite a lot of criticism?
I think that's undoubtedly one of the things that, well, we're all football fans, we've all been at football games, we know that football's an emotional sport and it can really make those emotions come to the fore, and that's one of the issues that we have to face up to, is how do we make being a referee something that can feel supported, that people can recognise that if you don't have a ref there, then your game doesn't happen, and so it's a critical part of the game. I know that working with colleagues in the referees department at the SFA, that they are really keen to do what they can to encourage and support more women into refereeing. They've got, and worked with them, we had female referees, current referees, helping support the ones that were interested in doing the course. We know that the regional associations of those refereeing departments are quite keen to be able to provide support and nurture to retain those referees once they've passed their course, because that's another challenge in itself. But I think it's a job for us all to do, is to try and improve that culture, recognise that, you know, referees will be learning. If it's a 16-year-old game and there's a new ref, that they're a young female too, and they'll be learning as they go as well. And so how do we make sure that environment can be just that wee bit more respectful, wee bit more kind of understanding and cognizant of what might put somebody off. But if you put somebody off being a ref, then the challenge is, where do you find that person to replace them if you want your game to go ahead? So I think it's something that across different leagues as well, that's not just for female, that's referees more general. I think about how we make the culture as good and as positive as it can be for the players and for referees as well.
And I suppose the same levels of visibility applies to officiating as it does to players. You know, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And at the World Cup, obviously in Australia, but the World Cup too in Qatar, we saw female referees officiating at a very high level and a high standard. That I would imagine would be just as important.
Oh, absolutely. I think, again, you know, the referees department are very keen to get more girls to referee, because there's really exciting career opportunities and pathways there for them if they want to pursue it to those heights. And, you know, Vicky Allen was one of the referees that spoke to some of the girls that were kind of keen to progress becoming a referee, and then having heard domestically to see that, you know, she's achieving great heights was really, I think, inspiring for them to hear just somebody who'd gone through it, lived and breathed it. So yeah, that's that critical thing for women's sport, visibility, and imagining yourself in that place and recognising that that's not something you should not consider. Absolutely, you should be thinking about yourself being in that place. At the other end of the pathway, really lots of opportunities as well for young girls to take, you know, referee a couple of games and be able to, you know, sustain their studies as well, or something, you know, all those opportunities through refereeing through a number of games at the weekend. So yeah, lots of things that, you know, we can do. But again, one of those pillars that's really critical to be moving alongside the growth of participation numbers, facilities, referees, coaches. Again, there was I can't remember, there wasn't, you know, there's a third of the coaches at the World Cup were female. So again, it's those things that we need to grow, as well as the numbers of players.
Just looking at a different avenue, Aileen, how does your political background benefit you in your current role?
Well, there we go. Well, I think in my job now compared to my job before, there are so many similarities in that. As a constituent MSP, my last role in government was for communities and local government. You were dealing with lots of organisations, groups, volunteers, and that's really not any different to this role. You know, we're dealing with a lot of volunteers who are pouring enormous amount of time and energy into providing opportunity for girls to play football. And so in that respect, it feels quite familiar territory. We're having to support volunteers, we're having to think about how do we grow the game in a strategic sense, we're having to work with lots of others who may have competing views, but what you get as a skill, I suppose, which is transferable from my last job, is trying to find and navigate through a path so that you can try as best as you can to resolve issues, or you can try and move issues forward as peaceably and as amicably as you possibly can, you know. And The other thing that my last job has probably provided me with is an incredibly thick skin as well, which is not quite important as well. So I'm thoroughly relishing the role that I have at the moment. We've got a really great team. We work collaboratively with the governing body and with our partners at the SWPL, most recently shown in our commercial partnership with Scottish Power. And so, there's lots to be positive about as well, and lots to be taken forward, and lots of things that I can take from my last job and apply here.
Definitely. Last week we were speaking to the CEO of Glasgow City, and she had mentioned about the different stadiums that the teams play at, and not everybody is really familiar with that. And we sent our reporter Blair Malloy out to Petershill Park to tell us all about it.
The current Women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand is only serving to increase the interest in the women's sport. Here in Scotland, we've seen a dramatic finish to last season's SWPL campaign, where Glasgow City scooped the title with a last gasp winner. This is making the SWPL a popular alternative with families looking for a fun and friendly footballing environment. I've come along to Partick Thistle versus Glasgow City today to see what it's all about and find out why you should consider supporting your local team. Today's venue, Petershill Park, is just 10 minutes drive from Glasgow City Centre and is shared by today's home side Partick Thistle and also away team Glasgow City. Today, it's £7 for an adult, £5 for an over 65, and to encourage that fun, family-friendly atmosphere, under 16s go free. There were a number of things for sale at the ground, including scarves, pin badges and hats. However, I didn't see any replica shirts for sale. I spoke to a few fans before kick-off to get their thoughts on the women's game in Scotland.
I think it's really, really important. I think for girls like Lily, they attend men's matches as well. They enjoy it. It encourages them to play football. But I think when they come to games like this and see the girls perform well, see the team spirit that exists, get involved, get to know the team, it really, really encourages them to push on and play the game.
The atmosphere, so we went to a game, it was the Scottish Cup final, wasn't it? At Hearts Stadium? Yeah. It was a really good atmosphere at that. There was fireworks, wasn't there?
Yeah. It's not as loud and more, I can't think of the word, like people don't shout as much and swear as much.
Inside the ground, it was a fun and welcoming occasion as both sets of fans sat together, despite some typical Derby Day tackles flying in on the pitch. Aside from the usual half-time pies, there was a plenty of options on the menu. The kids in the crowd even got their chance to play in the park during the break. It's all over here in the Petershill Park derby where Glasgow City have ran out 3-0 winners over Partick Thistle. Partick Thistle women's manager Brian Graham wasn't here this afternoon as he was in action with the men's team taking on Hearts in the Viaplay Cup. He'll be proud of his side's start, however, as he held out for the opening 22 minutes before Hayley Lauder gave Glasgow City the lead. She latched onto an Oscarson cross and swept the ball home from just around the penalty area. It was 2-0 10 minutes later when Amy Muir's long-range shot from the left somehow found its way into the bottom left-hand corner. The game was sealed with 10 minutes to go when Lauren Davidson made it 3-0 from the penalty spot. Glasgow City will be back here on Wednesday night as they face Motherwell, where they'll be looking towards the support that came out in force today to help propel them towards the defence of their league title.
Well, as Blair says there, Alison, a 3-0 win for Glasgow City. We can expect them to have a pretty tremendous season coming ahead.
Yeah, it was interesting. I thought Leanne Ross was interesting in her post-match analysis. You could tell she was very unhappy at the level of performance, frustrated at how slow the game had been at times, at the decision-making, especially in the final third. And yeah, I think clearly she still expects more to come from this Glasgow City side. They've retained a number of key players this season. They've brought in some players, lost a few players, as everyone. And I think you can allow a bit of time just to manoeuvre and enable players to gel. But I think certainly what you'll see is a gradual increase in tempo just as the season starts to pick up pace.
Yeah. And a win, Aileen, for Celtic and Rangers. Do you expect it to be another 3-horse race right to the very end this season?
Well, yeah, I think it probably will be. However, I think you'll see great improvement from Hearts. I think they've invested significantly.
And 2 wins out of 2 to start it off with.
And I think that's a sign of the growing maturity of and the competitiveness. And I think that's one of the things that women's football generally has tried to do. It's not just, and we've seen from the World Cup, it's not just the favourites that have been battling it out. Actually, there's a lot more competitiveness. Yeah. And, even though it might be one of those top 3, it could be 4 this time last season, it didn't stop right up until the very last kick of the game. So that's a really exciting thing for women's football, because if you can keep that thrill going, then it keeps that interest alive and becomes an ever more exciting prospect for people to be attracted to as well. So I think it'll be interesting for me to see how Hearts do. I think this time. Really pleased to see Montrose. I know they didn't have the result probably that they wanted to, but they've had a phenomenal success after being promoted from the Championship. SPL 2 and now SPL 1, so we're good to see how they go.
It is difficult for teams like that, where you do feel as though there is quite a chasm between top and bottom, and in the top flight as though you have this top 3 that just seem to be in a different solar system from the rest, and then you almost have a middle chunk, and then the bottom. It can be quite challenging, I think, for teams such as last term when Glasgow women came up, and it can be fairly sobering at times, because you really appreciate there is a gulf between that top flight and then one below.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think we're conscious of that as well between the SWPL 2 and the Championship. How do we make sure that any teams that get promoted up from our top league, that they don't have such a gap to kind of overcome? But and that's probably a big thing for not just our league or for the SWPL or for women's football generally. I think that's something that even you see in the men's game and domestically here too as well. But I think it's that question is that how do we then, if we're seeing that that's happening, what are the actions that we need to do to try and plug that, to try and close those gaps, or to make sure that the leagues are competitive and as competitive as they can be, because that's the thing that will drive interest, attract new crowds, as we saw at Petershill at the weekend.
You almost feel as though there's maybe a very gradual evolution towards a professional setup in the top flight, and maybe once you could establish that, it doesn't come overnight, that you have to allow it to percolate and take time, but once you almost have that spine throughout the league of professional contracts, that you maybe see a jump in quality again.
Yeah, I think so, and I think as well that's what you've seen through in the World Cup too as well. All the kind of teams that are able to compete well are the ones that are probably growing in numbers of full-time athletes and the fitness levels required to compete for the full 90 minutes. Maybe that's some of the issues that you start to see, where there's a difference where teams can go toe-to-toe for the first hour and maybe struggle a wee bit for the last half hour.
Like the Rangers game, so one each for an hour, and then all of a sudden, you sense the difference.
And that luxury of having been full-time and be able to commit and really, again, hone your craft, develop your skills, improve your fitness, and be able to work at that without having to, what so many women have to do is across football has been to juggle their football commitments along with work and life as well. And I think that's probably where the conversation needs to go if we're going to think about what next, is how do we keep gaps small? How do we improve competitiveness? And what do we need to do to drive forward that growing professionalism? But however, I would say though the SWPL has made such great strides over the last wee while as well, and it's interesting to see what comes next there.
What are the steps that we need to take then to make sure that when teams are making the jump up to the more competitive leagues, that it's not so demoralising as such when they face the more professional teams? How do we bridge that gap?
I think probably a lot of it will be around investment and money and commercial opportunities, and that's where we need to work hard. So we are really pleased. We have announced earlier on this summer, we announced a new commercial partnership with Scottish Power, and they are wholesale committed to not just having a sponsorship where they sponsor a couple of leagues. They really want to leave this as a legacy, and so they're not just interested in the top leagues. They've got sponsorship with SWPL 1 and 2, but they've also really keen to support the youth game. So they support our Youth Challenge Cup specifically, but they're really interested in making sure that there is an impactful legacy, that the girls are supported, that there is opportunity to build and drive the game going forward. So 10 years time we can look back and say that this was a pivotal moment, and then that means that's why we have to then work out what do we do, how do we grow opportunities, how do we increase competitiveness, how do we make sure girls and women feel supported in the games that they play, how do we also think about thinking creatively and differently. Might that mean that we need to not expect girls and women to fit in with the existing league structures, or does that mean that we might need to think about how do we change and adapt how our games are formed in order to accommodate the different and competing demands that maybe girls and women might have. So at the moment we're trying to engage with some of our players to work out, how much of a challenge is it to continue to play when you've got your exams, or what do you maybe need to do, what do we need to do and think differently about as well going forward to alleviate some of that. And that will mean that we just need to continue to engage and not ever expect to solve it immediately. It'll take time. These things will take time, and if you grow that base of girls that want to play football, then that will stand us in good stead to ensure then that the very best can continue and can hopefully continue to play their game here in Scotland, because there's opportunities to have a career in football.
Let's just have a look at how competitive the weekend has been then. Let's have a look at the table and see what those results have done. Alison, just looking at those results there, do you expect that gap to widen there at the top?
Yeah, I think it becomes inevitable that it will widen as games go on. I think it looks like a very familiar table at the minute. I think certainly you'd expect Celtic, Rangers, Glasgow City to be up there. I expect Hearts to really try and challenge that top seat. I have to say, I think they're maybe just still a little bit off the pace. It remains to be seen. I could be wrong in that, but I think what you've seen is an incredibly strong start from the three that we saw all jostling for that title last term. I think Celtic in particular underwent incredible surgery this summer, and yet they've opened their campaign very strongly. I think there were a few question marks. They lost that Glasgow Cup game to Rangers, a 2-1 win, 2 late goals, and I think there were maybe a few question marks at that point about whether or not Celtic were ready to start the season. You're almost bringing in an entire clutch of new players. They kept key players. They kept Kelly Clark, they kept Caitlin Hayes, but you're bringing in 10 new players into that first team squad, international players, so new culture, new language at times too. But I think what you've seen is a very impressive start from them, impressive from Joe Potter's Rangers, and of course Glasgow City. You almost take it for granted that Glasgow City go and sustain where they were. Every year you think this might be the term that there's a drop off and that the other two are catching them, but I think you would have to applaud just how they flex that muscle and stay where they are season after season. And I know they lost the league to Rangers the season before last, but they've set the benchmark for everyone else to follow over the last decade.
Absolutely, and we have another full card coming up on Wednesday. Let's have a look at those games. So we've got Hearts will host Rangers, Dundee United take on Hibs, Montrose will face Aberdeen, Spartans host Celtic, Glasgow City will face off against Motherwell, and Hamilton will host Partick Thistle. Just before we go, Aileen, if there's anything that you'd hope to implement from your role in this coming season, what would it be?
Gosh, that's a really good question, because actually there's probably lots of different things. I think, we would like to continue to pursue more commercial opportunities. I think we'd like to see ever more girls and women taking the sport up, harness the opportunities and the thrill that the World Cup has created. And I think it would be good also, I think one of our leagues are helped, supported by some of our club members on what are called league management committees, and I know Kate Cooper, who's the coach at St Mirren, she's very keen that we look at goalkeeping as a specialist role as well. And Mary Earps had talked about the fact that nobody was able to buy her strip, and some of the challenges around recruiting goalkeepers. So I think there's some of those areas that we need to kind of flag up about how do we support girls to take up those particular positions that are sometimes challenging. And I know that Kate is doing a remarkable job at St Mirren, as is all of the teams across our leagues as well. We've had, at Petershill Park, Rossvale was one of our teams that play there as well. So Petershill, a real hub for women's football in Glasgow. So I think we'll continue to engage with our clubs, continue to respond to their needs, and continue to work with the Scottish Power to build that legacy, and hope that continues to grow apace and look to explore new opportunities as they emerge, but particularly driving forward the game, creating that visibility, creating the interesting stories that our girls have that keeps our leagues relevant in the media eye as well, to inspire new people coming forward.
Absolutely. Well, Aileen, thank you so much for joining us here today. From myself, Kerry Pollock, Alison McConnell, we'll be back next week. Thanks for watching.